Hi.
There are things in life that look perfect from the outside. A neat house, a well-kept garden, shared dinners where the conversation flows easily enough. My husband is the kind of man people call reliable, thoughtful, honest. Someone you can trust to always choose the right wine for dinner and remember to fill the gas tank before a long drive. We've been together long enough that most of our days feel like well-rehearsed routines. No drama, no fights, just quiet. But sometimes quiet can be deafening. It wasn't a sudden thing. More like a slow drift, the kind you don't notice until you wake up one morning realizing you haven't felt truly touched in months. Not just physically, though that too, but touched in the way that makes your skin remember it hours later. The way that makes you feel seen. I used to tell myself it was normal. That real marriages, good marriages, aren't about passion. They're about respect, friendship, building a life together. And we had all of that. What we didn't have anymore was the feeling that someone was reaching for me not because they should, but because they couldn't help it. The first time I really looked at our neighbor, not just noticed him, but looked, was on one of those idle afternoons when my husband asked him for help fixing the back fence. The fence had been leaning for a while, and my husband, as always, was practical. Might as well ask him. He's good with his hands. I stood by the kitchen window longer than I needed to, watching them work. Watching him work. The way he moved, sleeves rolled up, focused, not in a hurry. There was something about his ease that unsettled me, something unpolished and alive. He caught me looking once, didn't smile, didn't nod, just held my gaze for a second longer than felt polite, then turned back to the fence. It should have ended there, but that glance stayed with me longer than it should have. It followed me through the rest of the afternoon, all the way into the evening, where I sat across from my husband at dinner, nodding along to his story about the hardware store, hearing the words but feeling that something inside me had shifted. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment the ground under my feet began to move. Quietly, patiently, the kind of shift that starts small but doesn't stop. And somehow the next morning, I found myself stepping outside just as our neighbor came to finish the work on the fence. Coincidence, I told myself. Just coincidence. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him. That stepping out into the garden that morning, coffee cup in hand, was nothing more than routine. But I lingered by the edge of the yard, under the soft shade of the maple, watching him line up the last of the boards along the fence. His movements were steady, unbothered by the heat. Focused. I noticed the faint smear of dirt across his forearm, the way his hair curled slightly at the edges from sweat. Small, ordinary things that suddenly felt too sharp, too vivid. When he looked up and caught my eyes again, there was no awkwardness between us. No nervous glances away. If anything, the silence felt heavier this time, as if we both recognized something neither of us was ready to name. You like how it's turning out? His voice broke the stillness, smooth, without expectation. I nodded, swallowing down the tightness in my throat, forcing the words to sound casual. It looks great. Thank you for helping with it. He gave a slight nod, wiped his hands on his jeans and leaned against the fence, arms crossed loosely across his chest. There was an ease about him that only made my pulse quicken more. He wasn't trying. And that somehow made it worse. The conversation drifted toward safer topics. Weather, the struggle to keep the lawn green this time of year, the neighborhood barbecue someone mentioned organizing. It should have ended there. Just another neighborly exchange. But I didn't go back inside. Neither did he. Minutes passed. Long enough that standing apart began to feel deliberate. I guess I should let you get back to your day, I said, though I didn't move. He didn't smile. His eyes stayed on me. Quiet. Thoughtful. If you wanted to stay, I wouldn't mind. The air between us shifted, dense as fog. I felt the weight of the coffee cup in my hand, fingers tight around it, like holding on to something solid could keep me from doing what I already knew I wanted. I don't know which of us moved first. I only remember the space between us closing too fast, And then his hand was on my jaw. Steady. Rough. Thumb grazing the corner of my mouth like he was trying to memorize it. The first brush of his lips against mine was slow, questioning, but I didn't pull away. I should have. God, I should have. Instead, I leaned into him, gave in to the heat that had been building inside me for longer than I wanted to admit. His hand slid to the back of my neck, fingers curling into my hair, holding me there. The kiss deepened. Not frantic, not rushed, but aching. Like two people tasting the thing they knew they shouldn't have but had craved for so long it already felt familiar. It was me who broke it. Pulling back just enough to feel the absence of his mouth on mine, my breath sharp in my throat, my heart pounding hard enough that I was sure he could hear it. "We can't," I whispered, the words tasting like a lie even as I said them. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, gaze steady as if he understood that what I was really saying was, "Not yet." I turned, walked back toward the house, my legs weaker than I wanted them to be. Inside, I stood against the closed door for a long time, my fingers pressed hard against my lips as if I could wipe the moment away. But it was already too late. The kiss had happened, and somewhere deep inside, I knew it wouldn't be the last. The following days unfolded with the same rhythm as always. The soft click of the front door when my husband left for work, the hum of the dishwasher, the quiet tapping of my fingers on the laptop as I half-heartedly responded to emails. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside, everything had shifted. I found myself moving through the hours as if I were standing in a room filled with smoke. Every thought, every small task clouded by the memory of his hand on my face, the taste of his mouth against mine. I tried to shake it off, to bury the sensation under the weight of routine. But the more I fought it, the heavier it pressed against me. At dinner, my husband talked about a new project he was leading at work. His voice calm, familiar, full of the same steady confidence that had once made me feel safe. I nodded in the right places, smiled when I was supposed to, but my mind was elsewhere, tracing the shape of someone else's lips, the warmth of a touch that hadn't felt obligatory. Later that night, as we lay side by side in bed, I felt his hand brush across my waist, tentative. A soft gesture, meant to bridge the quiet that had settled between us. I stayed still, eyes open in the dark, waiting to feel something. Anything. But there was no spark. Only the dull ache of obligation and the deeper sting of betrayal blooming quietly beneath my skin. I kissed him back when he leaned toward me. I let him hold me. I even told myself I wanted it to feel good. But my body gave him nothing. My mind, stubborn and unforgiving, kept drifting to the wrong set of hands. And when it was over, I rolled away, pressing my face into the pillow, ashamed of how easily I could perform the part of the good wife while my thoughts stayed somewhere else entirely. 2 days later, my husband mentioned the idea of a quick getaway. A weekend out of town, just the two of us. He spoke about it casually, as if we both hadn't noticed the distance growing wider between us. "I think we could use a little time away," he said, eyes flicking toward me over his coffee mug. I smiled, polite and automatic. "That sounds nice." In truth, the thought of being alone with him in some rented cabin, of forcing closeness that no longer came naturally, made my stomach twist. But I agreed anyway. Because I still believed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that maybe distance from home would clear the fog. Maybe getting away from the place where it all started would help me remember who I was supposed to be. The morning we packed the car, I caught sight of our neighbor out by his truck. He didn't wave, just stood there for a moment, watching as my husband loaded the last of the bags into the trunk. Our eyes met across the driveway, brief, unspoken. But in that short glance, I felt the weight of everything we weren't saying. On the road, my husband talked about the scenic route, about the little cafes we might stop at along the way. I listened, I nodded, but I kept replaying that look, that single moment before we drove away. It clung to me more tightly than anything my husband could offer. I wanted the trip to fix it, I wanted the quiet of the mountains, the change of scenery to be enough. But deep down, I already knew. It wasn't the place that was broken. It was me. The cabin my husband had chosen was exactly the kind of place designed to patch up a marriage. Picturesque, removed from the world, surrounded by tall pines and the soft hush of wind moving through the trees. It was quiet in the way people imagine peace should sound. The kind of silence meant to give space for reconnection, for slow breakfasts and long walks hand in hand. But silence has a way of magnifying what you're trying to ignore. We arrived just before sunset. He unpacked the car while I moved through the small kitchen, placing things where they didn't need to be placed, looking for something to do with my hands. There was nothing wrong between us on the surface. We smiled. We touched. But it felt like acting out a scene we'd rehearsed too many times, reading lines we no longer believed in. The first evening we sat out on the little porch with wine, the cool air brushing over my skin, the trees swaying gently as the sky faded from blue to deep orange. My husband talked about work again, about the stress, the long hours. I listened, nodding at the right moments, but my heart wasn't in the conversation. It felt like I was playing the role of the supportive wife, present, engaged, while my mind wandered elsewhere, back to a stolen kiss by the fence, back to rough hands and the heat that had settled too easily into my bones. When he reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, I didn't pull away. I held on, as if maybe the gesture itself could anchor me back to where I was supposed to be. He leaned in, kissed me softly, with that careful, practiced affection that once had been enough. But it wasn't heat I felt. Only the dull weight of expectation pressing down on my chest. That night in bed, he tried again. His touch was gentle, familiar, the rhythm of someone who knows your body well but hasn't truly seen it in a long time. I closed my eyes, letting my body follow the motions, willing myself to feel something other than the ache of guilt. But as his lips moved along my neck, all I could think about was how different it felt when it wasn't him. I hated myself for it. For the way my mind kept betraying me, pulling me away from the man I was supposed to want. The man who had given me nothing but steadiness, loyalty, a home. I hated how my skin seemed to remember someone else's hands more vividly than my husband's. The next morning, over coffee, he suggested we take a hike along one of the nearby trails. I agreed, smiling because it was easier than saying what I really felt. Easier than admitting that walking beside him through the quiet woods only made the space between us feel wider. We moved through the day with the same quiet politeness, talking about the trees, the air, the view from the ridge. But underneath it, I could feel the tension building. Not between us, but inside me. The weight of wanting something I couldn't name aloud, of holding on to a marriage that looked so perfect from the outside while I unraveled slowly within it. By the time we packed up and drove back home, I was exhausted from the effort of pretending. The cabin hadn't fixed us. The mountains hadn't soothed the ache. And when we pulled into the driveway, I saw him again. Our neighbor, carrying groceries from his truck, moving like nothing in the world could touch him. He didn't look over this time. But I did. I looked longer than I should have. Coming home felt heavier than I expected. I thought the trip might have given me some clarity, some sense of resolve. But all it did was deepen the hollow space inside me. The drive back was filled with small talk, playlists, half-hearted laughter. Two people going through the motions, hoping routine might smooth over what neither of us could say out loud. The house smelled faintly of the lavender candle I had left on the kitchen counter. The beds were made, everything just as we had left it, as if the time away hadn't happened at all. But I felt different, restless, like I had walked back into a life that no longer fit me the way it once did. My husband busied himself unpacking, folding clothes, checking emails. Always responsible. Always dependable. I watched him move from room to room, his focus steady, and felt the same familiar mix of gratitude and ache. He had done nothing wrong. And yet, standing there, I wanted to be anywhere but here. The next afternoon, while my husband was still catching up on work, I wandered out into the backyard. The air was thick with the warmth of late summer, the kind of heat that settles heavy on your skin. I wasn't planning to cross the yard. I wasn't planning anything. But when I heard the low hum of a drill from the neighbor's garage, my feet moved before my thoughts could catch up. I paused by the open side gate. He was there, crouched by a workbench, tightening something on a rusted metal frame. The muscles in his forearm flexed as he worked, small lines of sweat tracing down the back of his neck. It was too easy to watch him. Too easy to let my eyes linger on the way his body moved. I cleared my throat softly, half hoping he wouldn't hear me. But he did. He straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, and leaned casually against the edge of the table. "Back already?" His voice was even, unreadable. I nodded, folding my arms across my chest like a shield. "Yeah, it was nice. Peaceful." He gave a small tilt of his head, as if he could hear everything I wasn't saying. Silence stretched between us again, thick and loaded. I should have turned back. I should have left right then, gone inside, closed the door behind me, and reminded myself that this line had already been crossed once. But instead, I stepped forward, closing the space between us with a slowness that felt deliberate, reckless. "I didn't come here for anything," I said, though the words felt flimsy as they left my mouth. "No?" he asked, his eyes holding mine. Could have fooled me. I hated how easily he could see through me. Hated how standing this close to him made my skin prickle in ways I hadn't felt in years. My breathing felt shallow, my heart thudding loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. His hand moved first, brushing lightly against my wrist, waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. The second kiss wasn't soft, wasn't questioning. It was urgent, hungry, the kind of kiss that leaves no room for doubt. His hand slid to the small of my back, pulling me closer, and this time I didn't stop him. I leaned into it, let the heat of his body meet mine fully, let my fingers tangle briefly in the fabric of his shirt. The world outside the garage dissolved. No backyard, no houses, no husband just a few yards away. When I finally broke the kiss, breathless, my fingers still clutching the hem of his sleeve, I didn't apologize. There was nothing apologetic in the way he looked at me either. Only the same raw desire I felt burning in my chest. I stepped back slowly, my body aching from the effort it took to create distance between us again. Without a word, I turned and walked away, feeling the heat of his gaze follow me all the way to the gate. Inside my house, the air felt colder. Too quiet. I pressed my hands flat against the kitchen counter, trying to steady the shaking in my fingers, the racing of my pulse. I wanted to believe I could walk away from this, that I could close that gate behind me and mean it. But every part of me knew I wouldn't. The days that followed didn't unfold like I imagined they might. There was no avoidance, no dramatic retreat, no awkward small talk to smooth over what had already happened twice. Instead, it was worse, because neither of us pretended. We didn't need to. The air between us stayed charged, every accidental glance across the yard humming with something we no longer bothered to hide. I told myself I would stay away, that this would be the last time I let myself cross that line. But each morning, as I stood at the kitchen window watching the sunlight creep across the fence, I felt that familiar pull, like gravity had shifted just enough to keep tilting me in his direction. It wasn't about love. I wasn't deluded enough to call it that. What sat between us was something raw, magnetic, entirely physical. And yet so much more than just bodies wanting each other. It was the way he looked at me, like I was a woman he couldn't ignore. Like he wanted me not out of convenience, not out of duty, but because he couldn't help himself. At home, I played my part the way I always had. I cooked, I worked, I smiled when my husband asked how my day had been, but the words tasted hollow. His kindness, his steadiness, all the things I had once been so grateful for, now felt like walls closing in on me. Not because of who he was, but because of what I had become. Some nights he reached for me, gentle, the way he always was, seeking connection through touch. I let him. My body moved through the familiar steps, but my mind refused to stay. It drifted back to the heat of stolen kisses in a garage filled with the scent of oil and wood, back to the feeling of fingers pressed into my lower back, of lips that didn't ask permission because they already knew the answer. I tried harder than I cared to admit. I wore the silk nightgown he once complimented, lit the candle he said he liked. I wanted so badly to feel that ache for him again, to bring myself back into the space where we first began. But each attempt felt like acting in a role that no longer fit me. My body responded the way it was supposed to, but it was a performance. A hollow echo of desire, not the real thing. The worst part was how easy it was to keep the lie going, how little he noticed the difference. One afternoon, as I folded laundry at the dining table, my phone buzzed. A simple text. Need a hand with the ladder? It was nothing, innocent on the surface. But my pulse jumped anyway. I stared at the words for too long before typing back, I'm fine. Thanks. But I wasn't fine. And we both knew it. Later that evening, I stood outside in the garden watering the plants. I felt him before I saw him. The soft sound of footsteps behind the fence, the faint rustle of movement. He didn't call out, didn't say my name. But when I turned my head, there he was, leaning casually against the gatepost, arms crossed, eyes steady on me. No words were needed. His presence alone pressed hard against every boundary I was still pretending to hold. The sky above us was turning the color of rust and smoke, the last light of the day slipping quietly away. I could feel my resolve weakening with each breath, my body already betraying me, craving the heat of his touch before he ever reached out. And somehow, standing there between the fading sun and the weight of my choices, I knew this wasn't going to end where it started. It was almost laughable, the way life went on as if nothing had shifted beneath its surface. My husband continued to move through his days with the same calm predictability, his voice steady as he asked about my work, my plans for the afternoon, if I had remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. There were no questions in his eyes, no suspicion, only the quiet comfort of routine, the safety of trust. I started to hate him for it, not because of anything he had done, but because his blind faith made me feel uglier than the act itself. He believed in me, in us, without hesitation. And every smile I returned, every casual kiss on the cheek, felt like one more stone in the growing pile of guilt pressing down on my chest. But guilt, I learned, doesn't always stop you. Sometimes it sharpens the hunger, makes the wanting more dangerous, more urgent. It makes the moments you steal taste sweeter because you know how wrong they are. He asked again that week if I wanted to plan another trip. Maybe the coast this time, he offered, his eyes soft, hopeful. I thought it might be good for us. I nodded, told him it sounded nice, but my heart was somewhere else entirely. Already pacing the floor of a neighbor's garage, already feeling the heat of eyes on my back. When the weekend came, my husband joined a group of colleagues for an early morning hike, something I had pretended to be too tired for. The moment the front door closed behind him, the house felt too quiet, the walls too close. I didn't plan to cross the yard, not this time. But when I saw him outside, shirt clinging to his back in the heat, loading bags of soil into the bed of his truck, my feet betrayed me before my mind could catch up. Again. He looked up as I approached, his gaze slow, deliberate, as if he had been expecting me all along. There was no hesitation between us anymore, no awkward pretense of small talk. You're alone, he said, not asking, just stating the obvious. I nodded once, lips pressed tight, my hands fidgeting at my sides. I wanted to be the one with control. I wanted to hold on to the illusion that this wasn't what it was. But the moment he stepped forward, closing the space between us, I felt my will crumble as easily as it had the first time. His hand found my waist, pulling me toward him with the same unspoken certainty that had haunted me for days. I felt the press of his mouth against my throat, the warmth of his breath scattering any reason I had left. My hands gripped the edge of his shirt, fingers curling tightly into the fabric like I might fall if I didn't hold on. When our lips met again, it wasn't careful. It wasn't questioning. It was reckless, hungry, the kind of kiss that takes and takes, leaving nothing behind but breathless want. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I told myself to stop, to pull away. But I didn't. I pressed into him, giving as much as I took, letting the heat rise between us until my skin burned under his hands. This time, I was the one who broke the kiss, but not because I wanted to, only because I had to. My breathing came hard and fast, my body aching with the need to erase the space that still remained between us. I stepped back slowly, forcing the distance, though every part of me screamed against it. He didn't chase me. He stood still, watching, his eyes darker now, his chest rising and falling with the same uneven breath I felt rattling in my own ribs. I turned without a word, walked back through the open gate, my legs weak, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. Every step away from him felt heavier than the last. But even as I crossed back into my own yard, the taste of him lingered on my lips. And all I could think was how much I wanted more. There's a particular cruelty in how normal life insists on continuing, even when your world is quietly, steadily coming undone. The dishwasher still needs unloading. The bills still arrive in the mail. The neighbor waves from across the street as if nothing beneath the surface has shifted. As if my hands weren't still trembling from the last time I touched him. I moved through the week on autopilot. Smiles where they were expected. Dinner on the table by 7. Polite laughter at my husband's dry jokes. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, everything was rearranged, unstable, like furniture pushed too close to the edge of a collapsing floor. There was no plan. No secret messages. No late-night phone calls. Nothing you could point to as evidence of betrayal. But the hunger between us had grown roots. It lived in every glance, every accidental meeting by the fence, every too long silence that said more than words could bear. I started finding reasons to be outside when I knew he might be there. Trimming the roses, wiping down the patio chairs that didn't need wiping, pulling weeds that could have waited. Any excuse to be close enough to feel his presence. It wasn't just physical. It was the way he looked at me. Unflinching. Like I was the only person in the room. Like he saw through every polite nod, every practiced smile. There was no effort in him to hide what he wanted. No need for games. And that honesty, raw and unapologetic, was the thing that undid me more than anything. The tension grew quieter, but heavier. We barely spoke now when we crossed paths, but every glance was louder than a shout. There was no awkwardness between us, only a thick understanding that hovered in the space where words should have been. I told myself to avoid him, to stay on my side of the yard. But want has a way of making rules feel like suggestions. The craving didn't lessen. It sharpened. Every day without his hands on me made the memory of his touch brighter, more unbearable. It was late on a Wednesday afternoon when I heard the knock at the back door. Not the front. Never the front. Just a quiet 2-tap knock that sent heat straight to my chest. I opened the door before I could tell myself not to. He stood there, one hand resting against the frame, calm, steady as ever. No smile. No explanation. His eyes traced my face slowly, as if checking whether I'd changed my mind, whether the ache inside me had gone soft. It hadn't. I stepped back just enough to let him inside. The door clicked softly shut behind him, the space between us narrowing so quickly it felt like the air itself had gone thin. There was no rush, no clumsy, frantic grabbing. Only his hands, warm and certain, cupping my face as he leaned in, brushing his lips over mine once, slow enough that I could feel my own hesitation break. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, his mouth pressing deeper into mine. Deliberate, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. I melted into it before I even realized I'd moved. When we broke apart, neither of us spoke. He let his hand fall from my cheek, fingers grazing lightly down the side of my neck as he stepped back. His breath still rough, eyes locked on mine. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, thick with the weight of what we weren't saying, what we didn't need to say. He left as quietly as he came, the soft click of the door behind him echoing louder than any slam could have. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my back pressed against the counter, my body still humming from the feel of his hands, the press of his lips. I should have felt ashamed. I should have felt disgusted with myself. But all I felt was the unbearable ache of wanting him again. The worst part about crossing a line is realizing how easy it is to keep walking past it once you've already stepped over. There's no grand moment of reckoning, no dramatic thunderclap to signal that you've gone too far. Just the slow, steady erasure of whatever boundary you thought would keep you safe. Days turned into weeks, and I kept moving through my life like a woman wearing someone else's skin. The meals, the errands, the gentle touches from my husband that used to feel comforting now felt foreign against my body. I answered his questions with the same soft tones, smiled at the right moments, kept the calendar full of dinner plans and weekend projects. And yet, beneath it all, something had unraveled so completely that I couldn't even remember where the first thread had come loose. It wasn't constant with my neighbor. There were no scheduled meetings, no careful plotting. We didn't need to plan. Want doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It shows up in the quiet spaces between what should be and what is. Some mornings I would catch him outside, watering the plants, fixing the latch on his gate, and our eyes would meet for just a second too long. No words, no gestures, just the heat of knowing, the hunger that neither of us had the willpower left to hide. The first time I let him come inside the house was on a Thursday. My husband was away on an overnight work retreat, a detail I hadn't offered, but which I knew he was aware of. The knock on the back door was softer than usual, almost hesitant. I could have ignored it. I could have stayed curled up on the couch beneath the weight of my own guilt. But I opened the door. He didn't step inside right away. He stood there, his eyes tracing my face as if waiting for permission I'd already given 100 times over. I didn't say a word. I simply stepped back, the gesture enough. The air inside the house felt different with him there. Charged, alive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He moved toward me slowly, each step deliberate, and when his hand brushed against my arm, the tension snapped like a pulled thread. The kiss was rougher this time, fueled by everything we'd held back for too long. His hands at my waist, pulling me into him like he needed the contact as much as I did. There was nothing polite in the way his mouth claimed mine. No hesitation in the way my fingers tangled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring myself to him like I might drift away otherwise. We moved together like people starved for touch, for feeling, for the rawness of being wanted without question. There was no care for the time, no thought to the place. Only the heat of his body pressing against mine, the sharp contrast of his hands rough against the softness of my skin. When it was over, we stood there in the quiet, breathless, the distance between us shrinking again before either of us could pretend to rebuild it. He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine for something neither of us could name. "Do you regret this?" he asked, voice low. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him this was wrong, that it would stop here. But the words didn't come. I felt the sting of them in my throat, but my lips stayed closed. Because regret isn't the same thing as wanting to stop. He nodded once, as if my silence told him all he needed to know. Then he stepped back, his hands falling away, the space between us filling again with everything we couldn't say. When he left, the door closed softer than before, but the sound of it still felt deafening. I stood there long after he was gone, the weight of what we had done pressing into my chest like a hand. And still, beneath the shame, beneath the tangled guilt, the ache of wanting more remained.
Bye.